Welcome, everyone. For those you don't know, I'm Tom Kirshner, a member of the board here at the MAREA, which is the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association. MAREA is a nonprofit educational organization. I have a couple of announcements before we start tonight's presentation on wind energy. Coming up from the SEF.org. It's a Sustainable Energy Fund. They're holding a carbon auditing professional certification training, and that takes place June 17th to June 19th. Questions to ask: do you lead, plan, or coordinate sustainability programs at your organization or firm? Are you interested in or specialize in carbon reduction or GHG emissions programs? That would be greenhouse gas. Are you an energy engineer, facility or business manager, supply chain professional, utility official, consultant, contractor, financial officer, or energy service company professional? If so, this course is for you. If you would like to learn more, go to the Sustainable Energy Fund's website, the SEF.org, and that's June 17th. The other thing I wanted to point out, you may not know this. If this is your first time or if you've seen a few of our presentations, we have excellent speakers like tonight. On the YouTube, we have a YouTube channel. I'll give you the address then on the comments section of your Zoom video. But if you just go to YouTube and look up Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association, you'll find the videos. And as of today, there's 49 videos. And tonight's presentation will be up there in a couple days as well. And then the last announcement I have, next month.
Tom, we can also find us on our website. If you can't find us on YouTube, you can go to our website. That'll take you to YouTube, and then you can search around for other ones too. So
right, okay, and our website.
Yep.
Last announcement. So coming up on June 25th, we have a speaker coming for talking about the Dark Skies Initiative. If you've never heard of that, what the Dark Skies Initiative is a campaign to reduce light pollution. Its goals include increasing the visibility of stars at night, minimizing the impact of electric lighting on the environment, and improving the well-being and safety of people and wildlife. So should be a very interesting presentation. And again, that's June 25th. Now for tonight's speaker, Chuck will be making that introduction. Chuck?
Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Doug Copeland, the Atlantic Shores Development Manager. Mr. Copeland's worked in the renewable energy industry for over 15 years, leading development efforts in onshore and offshore wind, solar, and energy storage. Currently, Mr. Copeland oversees the development and overall portfolio of Atlantic Shores, with a focus on the pre-financial decision phase in his role. In this role, Mr. Copeland leads the interconnection strategy, fishing industry engagement, oversees real estate efforts, external affairs, government relations, and port strategy. His work also includes serving on national offshore wind industry boards and advisory committees in New York, New Jersey, and Maryland. Prior to his career in the renewable energy industry, Mr. Copeland ran a nationally recognized economic development program. He earned his bachelor's degree in comprehensive science from Villanova University and a master's degree from Boston College. And it's my privilege tonight to introduce Doug and hear the latest and greatest about offshore winds. Doug, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, everyone. So I can tell, Chuck, that is my bio from the last time I spoke to you all. I know how many years I've been in the industry based on how old my son is, because I started just about a month after he was born. So I've now hit the 18-year mark, which my son keeps reminding me how mature and old he is. Which then, of course, he reminds me how mature and old I am. But very much appreciate that. And my my role on Atlantic Shores has shifted a little bit. I'm now part of our commercial team, so still very much connected to those folks, but really focused primarily on a lot of our bid strategy and overall kind of commercial implementation of projects. But I can speak to all different aspects of offshore wind. And so as I go through tonight, I think your sort of standard protocol is to fire away with questions at the end. I'm happy to follow the standard rules here, and just know that as I go through the slides, if there's anything once I get to the end you want me to jump back to, I'm more than happy to. It's really not a problem to kind of bounce around the slides at the end once I've gone through everything. So with that, I'm happy to share some slides and take it away. So let's see here. All right, everybody got me on the screen there?
Yes.
Cool. So again, I'm Doug Copeland. I work at Atlantic Shores Offshore Wind. The thing with Atlantic Shores is it's actually a joint venture of Shell Renewables and EDF, or sorry, Shell New Energies and EDF Renewables. I come from the EDF side. I've been there for just hit my 15-year mark actually last week. And as Chuck did say, I've been in many different aspects of the renewable energy industry, and really have enjoyed that opportunity, and always felt like offshore wind is kind of the place I wanted to be, and very excited to be part of that. And so as I go through the slides tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of a general overview of kind of the state of offshore wind. It shows up in the news a lot. My benchmark for showing up in the news a lot, whatever that might mean, is whenever my mom starts sending me news articles and asking me if that's about my project. So if it makes her Apple News feed, then I figure that it's out there in some way besides just folks who are on the inside of the industry. And really going to talk about kind of the future growth of the industry and different things that are going on, both positive, but also can talk about some of the challenges, and really for the most part focus on the Eastern Seaboard, which is where, oddly enough, a company with the title Atlantic Shores is spending most of our time. But happy to speak about other places in the US as well. So I'm not sure how sort of super sharp this map is, but I can tell you that you can find it on a couple of different federal websites. But this came from BSEE, which is the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. It's also underneath all in the Department of Interior. But these are maps. You can get the gist of them, I think, without too much trouble. This is the East Coast. And so if I guess you can't probably see my cursor too much, but up here, with these many colors, we'll say this center map that's right here. These are the lease areas off of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So this red and yellow and purple and green and brown and kind of yellow and blue and this other sort of orangey color. If we head a little further south to this map that's down in the bottom right-hand corner, we have, I'll give you some insider things. This green lease, we affectionately in the industry call the pizza slice. It's owned by a company called Equinor for a project called Empire Wind, and pizza slice should be fairly apparent. These leases out here, this blue and orange and purple and green and brown, are in an area called the New York Bight. The Bight is this area that sits off of New Jersey and Long Island. This area down here with the pink and the red, and then the gray and the purple, those are the areas that are described pretty much as the New Jersey lease areas. And then down here in the bottom left-hand corner, these are the most southern leases. You've got, if we go from the top, we've got a site off of Delaware, another one off of Maryland, one off of Virginia, and one off of North Carolina. And so if you look at the bigger map that's behind it, you can kind of see where they all fit in. And Atlantic Shores has 3 of these lease areas. If we go to this bottom corner, again, we have the red, the pink, and the orange. Many other companies are kind of spread out holding these leases. And then what you also see on this map are these other large blue areas. There's 2 little ones right there, these big giant ones, this one right here off of Virginia, these large ones up here in what's called the Gulf of Maine. And these are proposed areas that some of them will become leases, some of them will not. The federal government, through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, BOEM, they run this entire process. BOEM was a fairly sleepy agency for most folks up until maybe 12 or 15 years ago. They handled all of the sand mining leases. So if you go to the shore and you're at a place where the beach has been removed after a big storm, all that replenishment, that work actually goes through BOEM as the overseers of that. And they're mostly known for overseeing oil and gas leasing. And the US waters go from, the state waters go from 0 to 3 miles. And then from 3 miles to 200 is federal waters. So BOEM is regulating that portion of the continental shelf. And you can see on this map here that it's kind of lighter blue, and then there's this dark line and it's darker blue. If you're on the West Coast, if anybody's been out there, there's no light blue. The West Coast is pretty much beach, and then it drops off. Here in the East Coast, the reason you have so many of these leases in these areas is this whole light area. This is the continental shelf, much shallower, running anywhere from maybe 60 to 200 feet. So very good places for the construction of offshore wind as far as the feasibility of construction. Some of these areas that are proposed in these blobs down here, that's a technical term. And then this one's up here. Those are actually designed for floating wind. And again, those are prospective areas that will be narrowed down into much smaller lease areas. For example, these bite leases that are right here were actually one giant area originally, and then broken up into smaller sections. And so that gives you a sense of all the different leases that are running from the Massachusetts, Rhode Island area up here in the north, down through New York Bight, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, all the way down to North Carolina. We have 3 projects that are under construction right now. We have Vineyard Wind, Sunrise Wind, and then these are called transition pieces. These are actually for the Dominion project, which is off of Virginia. So Vineyard Wind, oddly enough, not too far from Martha's Vineyard. Sunrise Wind is off of the end of Long Island, and the Dominion project is off of Virginia. These are really cool to show, to be brutally honest with you. It's so fun to be able to show utility scale projects in the construction phase. I didn't get to do that 3 years ago when Chuck first introduced me to y'all. We had, 2 turbines that were in the water in Virginia or proposed at that time, and we had the 5 turbines off of Block Island. And so for whatever ups and downs we have right now as an industry, to know that there's 3 projects under active construction with more in the next couple of years is just pretty darn exciting. The one thing I will just step back, just since we have pictures here, this shows you how the blade is installed. You can see that it's in this case, this sling basically that comes up on the crane. These are transition pieces which are put on top of the foundation. So you can imagine the foundation sticks out of the water. The transition piece is placed on top of that, and then the turbine is installed on that. And so when you see a turbine in the ocean, you'll see this yellow base, which is very common. It's actually a Coast Guard color, specked yellow. And so these are the markings you can see that says like J04, J05, K04. You can tell those will be along very specific strings in the wind farm, which will make navigation and safety, very straightforward should the Coast Guard need to get there, or for, of course, on a regular basis, operations and maintenance. They just say, oh, I need to get out to turbine K04. Well, it'll be, or K04, it'll be very apparent on that. And so, just again, for scale, you can see how big these are standing up. These are traffic cones down here. That is not a small piece of equipment. And much of this is made in Europe, but more and more of it is coming from the US. Not all of it, and probably never all of it, but a tremendous amount of it. And it's just really exciting to be able to share photos of projects that they're not Atlantic Shores, but they're just ones that are going to be generating electricity. Some actually already are, and will continue to grow over the course of this year. This is a global map. This was put together by BNEF. They're a global consultancy. They put these kind of graphs together. I'm sure if you were to look at the same graph from cumulative offshore wind capacity by country in 2020, that it might look different than it does right now. But these are really, you can see that there's a couple countries that have made some giant steps. So the UK, you can see the orange has gotten a lot going. Germany is too. The biggest one is China. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing to see how ramped up they really have gotten, primarily with their own domestic turbines. But you don't see the US on here because this is really, we are still in the very small stages. These are in 10,000 megawatt chunks. I showed you slides. These projects combined will be a little over 2,400 megawatts, which would be, in essence, maybe up this tall. But those projects aren't even online. And so right now we have 2 projects in federal waters and 5. So, 20 something megawatts of projects, it's not even going to show up on this. We're just part of the other. But Atlantic Shores and the other developers that are here in the US are looking to change this. And so I think it's just important to be able to show how we fit into a global economy for all of this. The one thing inside of that is how we handle this as states. And so this was put together by cleanpower.org, which is actually the website for our trade association. So ACP, the American Clean Power Association. You can go on, you can find this report. That's why I put the website right there for you. All sorts of other information that's out there. Lots of cool graphics like this one that I totally grabbed from them. I gave them credit. So, I know Chuck is a professor, wants to make sure I'm citing my sources. But what I think is important for this is these are state targets, and these are determined by the states deciding they want to buy that power in some way. That we work with the federal government on leasing. So I'll just go back real quick. All these leases are controlled at the federal government, that all the permitting is through the federal government, but we count on the states to actually sell the power. And you have to have both for a project. You have to have a lease with all of your permits in place, and you have to have a power contract. And once you have those, then you're able to build the project, assuming you have all of your other supply chain in place. And so, a small state like Rhode Island, so that's a lot of megawatts for a small state. They've always kind of punched above their weight as far as the, kind of their goals. But then to see, New Jersey and New York, which are the 2 states in which I work the most, no slouch as far as their goals. And Maryland was an early mover, and they've expanded their interest in offshore wind. States like North Carolina, Louisiana, Maine, they're probably a little bit further behind, in California as far as not in their desire for offshore wind, but in the ability to bring projects online and interest in those markets. You saw Massachusetts make an early jump because they set up an offtake mechanism that made projects financeable, which is really the critical portion of all this. Same with Connecticut. Maine is now just exploring offshore wind. So while they have these goals, there's not necessarily a way to know that if you sell the power to that market, that you will be able to get a power contract, which is essential for the financing. Virginia is set up a little differently just because of their utility structure. While they are part of PJM, and I'm going to assume that most folks on this call know at PJM, there are our independent system operator, our air traffic controller for electrons. Virginia is portion of that. But unlike all the other states in PJM, their utilities are really just Dominion, as opposed to, in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, Delaware, we have multiple utilities that are all servicing customers. But what you see is states like Massachusetts kind of leading the way with the rest of New England, and then New Jersey and New York really kind of jumped up. New Jersey was a little slow for a little while, and so Maryland actually took the New Jersey rules, and they're not shy about this. They pretty much copied and pasted them and said, that's how we want to set up our power contract structure. And then once New Jersey had a change in administration, the governor came in and said, we're going to do better than that, and so raised the amounts of offshore wind interest for the state of New Jersey. Right now, we are in the middle of a New Jersey solicitation. So New Jersey opened about 3 weeks ago their round 4 solicitation that closes on July, I think, 11th. And New York has said that they are going to open up their round 6 solicitation starting this summer. And so each one of those states vying for projects serving them from, as I showed on the map before, the New York Bight or off the coast of New Jersey or New York, or potentially from the New England area as well. And then California is a bit of a wild card. They have a massive target, but it's also going to be much more complicated to build off the coast of California. As I said earlier, when I was showing that map, you look at that continental shelf. I'll just flip back to it. Here in the East Coast, you can go off 100 miles and still be at, maybe 200 feet deep. You go a couple hundred feet off of California and you're at the 2,000 feet deep. And so that's going to not make it impossible, but definitely makes it different when you talk about construction. But you can just see that this, for the most part, has been dominated by the East Coast as far as the states that are pushing for offshore wind. And that's primarily driven by a policy consideration of 1, wanting renewables, 2, wanting the jobs that come with that, and 3, having kind of governors and other policymakers looking at at the true opportunity and balancing that with ratepayer, protection, and really kind of going for it, saying, hey, look, we have this massive wind resource off the coast, and we want to leverage it. And so in the same way that you see other kind of industries grow, it's been a combination of kind of just geography, combination of policy needs, and then also looking at very much, we're starting to see the build out of transmission being a big driver for all this as well. As all this is going on, we have a lot of different investments. This again comes from ACP. It's a really cool report that's out there that just shows where there has been investments and where there's proposed investments. And so you can see that the orange here is ports. Ports is kind of an interesting one. It's something that initially when the joint venture Atlantic Shores was formed, I was leading our efforts. And that's really easy to say, like all those things that Chuck was walking through with me. When our team was 10 people or 20 people, I had many different hats. And that over time, we now have a ports lead. We now have an interconnection lead. We have a whole external affairs team, which is good because as we grew, so did the opportunities and responsibilities. And so ports, though, in New Jersey, that's kind of wild because you can't see it too well. But right up here in New Jersey, there's a port that is partially built called the New Jersey Wind Port. Very creative name. It's right next to the Salem nuclear power plant. And they are in the process of building it out over the course of the next couple of years in multiple phases. But the first phase is complete. And so for our first project, which I'll talk about in a few slides, we will marshal our turbines, which basically means that we'll stage them from there. We'll stage construction from there and bring them out to our lease area from there. You have other ports that are being built or like New Bedford, Massachusetts, massive fishing, history, and they built a specialized port for offshore wind. You see that also in Rhode Island, and then up in Baltimore. Actually, they're looking at there's some facilities there, and I think it's out there that they're looking at a large port also in Delaware, and then this one right down here in Virginia. That's Hampton Roads. Everyone is quite familiar if you've driven over the Chesapeake, Bay Bridge Memorial, the tunnel bridge. That's one of the largest ports in the world. That's why the bridge goes underwater and becomes a tunnel in a couple places, because that port facility has such large vessels coming in and out. They couldn't have them going underneath bridges. But then you've got other things, like you can see this yellow for vessels. It's harder to see, at least on my computer. Maybe you can see better on yours. Lots of presence in the Gulf. Some up here in the Northeast, but this historically has been where we've had shipbuildings in the U.S. But then we're starting to see these purple show up in manufacturing in different places, which is just phenomenal. And this is, again, like if you look at this cluster of dots up here, and you're to say, why does any governor, any state legislator want to push for offshore wind? I mean, we can all say that it's just for renewables, but we know that it's not. It's because of the jobs that come with it. And that's one of the biggest benefits for offshore wind, is that it comes with that duality of both the environmental opportunity, so we fight climate change as we do what we can to produce clean electricity, but then also the thousands and thousands of jobs that come with it. There was a report for the Vineyard project that at one point early on, there was 9,000 residents from Rhode Island employed in their project. I think there's only probably about 90,000 people in all of Rhode Island, right? So, I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but to have 9,000 people from one state, and not a very big state, involved in the early phase construction of one project is just amazing. And so that's really, this clustering, all these opportunities is really what is driving so much of the opportunity for offshore wind here on the Northeast. And then in California, you see, again, massive port opportunities, a little bit of research. And this is, again, kind of speaks to the earlier stage opportunity that California gives. That's why you're seeing so much of the current work up here between pretty much Virginia and Massachusetts. So I showed you early on the maps of all the current leases. These are some other maps, and this is put out by BOEM. You can see their logo right there, that they want to have other leases that come out. So this August, there'll be a lease in Central Atlantic. And then this fall, there'll be one in the Gulf of Mexico and Oregon and the Gulf of Maine. And so those are ones that are all slated to occur this year. And then they've rolled this out. This is the first time BOEM has ever done this. They've shown what their kind of future plans are. So we have potential for some other leases in the Gulf of Mexico, and those numbers after them are kind of the auction. So they haven't done a Central Atlantic lease yet. So that'll be one. And then down here in 26 would be Central Atlantic 2. This one here, probably a higher chance of some floating turbines a little bit further off the coast of Delaware and Maryland. They'll have another auction off the coast of in the Gulf of Mexico. There's proposed areas further out off the New York Bight. There's been one solicitation off California, so that's more slated for 28. And then there's these other ones that, to be honest, inside of our team, people are saying, I'd really love to work on the U.S. Virgin Islands or the Puerto Rico offshore wind projects. These kind of things usually come up in the wintertime when folks are stuck inside. But a lot of different opportunities that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is looking to do. And by publishing a chart like this, it sets in motion, their staff, their appropriations, their kind of work to ramp up for this, because each one of, I'm just going to jump way back, so I apologize for this, but I'll just make it clear. Each one of these leases comes with a multi-year timeline of permitting, and that all requires staff. And so when you go to something like this, you can set the stage for, okay, if we have the auction in August, then your permitting is going to start in about 2 years after all the data collection. But there's an initial time during that 2 years where BOEM is very much in a consultation, not necessarily reviewing applications, but getting things ramped up. And so it enables planning, which is really a critical part of all offshore wind. And to be able to have something like this put out is great for the industry. And the other thing it does is it shows supply chain. You match that up with this of these state targets, and you can start to see, okay, where will the markets really be over the next 10 or 15 years? And that's really essential for supply chain. Whenever a supplier is going to come in and set up a facility that might cost $200, $300, $500, $600 million to build, they're thinking about a very long time frame. They're thinking about at least a decade, where they need to know that all of those folks who they're going to invest in that facility is going to be operational. Because the last thing that they want to have, and I've seen this happen personally for a company I used to work for, not EDF Renewables, but my first job in wind industry. They built a blade factory and things were going great, and then they weren't, and the blade factory closed, and it was just such a shame. And so this is what we want to avoid in offshore wind, is any kind of that boom and bust. Of course, there'll be cycles, but we want to avoid the boom and bust. And so the more predictability of offtake agreements and the more predictability of leasing, the more basically, you can have true competition in the marketplace, but you don't necessarily have to worry about the kind of the bottom falling out of these opportunities for everyone. So I'm going to pivot a little bit more, kind of zooming into New Jersey. So as I mentioned earlier, this area out here is called the New York Bight. And so there's a handful of companies that have leases. So Equinor has this project called Empire Wind. A group called CIP has this red one. You could call that the pizza crust or the pizza slice. This is owned by a company called Blue Point, or leased by a company called Blue Point. You have Attentive, Community Energy, Leading Light Wind, and then Atlantic Shores has these two brown areas and this blue one. This right now to the south is owned by a company called Ørsted. Ørsted has actually decided that they no longer want to participate in the New Jersey market, so they are going to be selling their lease at some point. I don't have any details on it, but that is public knowledge that they have exited the New Jersey market. But all of these companies here are competing against each other to sell into New Jersey or New York for the most part. So in the last round in New Jersey, round 3, Leading Light won 2 projects, so their whole lease area. Attentive won 1, so about half their lease area. And so then, you have Community Energy, which has a project going to New York. Empire has a project going to New York. We have one coming in New Jersey and looking at future opportunities. And so it is, as I said on here, a very dynamic market, but these are the companies that are kind of vying for the opportunities to develop and build projects selling into the New York and New Jersey markets. For Atlantic Shores, we have about a 5 gigawatt portfolio, so I'm going to keep diving in. I'm going to actually get all the way to the point to talk about specific years of construction that are more, I think the years might be specific to us, but the steps are pretty generic to all projects. So just to give you a sense, so we started wide at the whole universe of US offshore wind, but getting now down to one project. So we have our lease areas. Our first project that we won, very creatively named Project One, is selling power in New Jersey. It'll be 1,510 megawatts. We'll be buying foundations from a new factory in New Jersey owned by a company called EEW. And then, as I said earlier, coming out of the New Jersey wind port. Our team is about 200 people. We have been around since the late 2018 and really kind of trying to focus on, like I said, the New York and New Jersey markets especially. Our core values that we think kind of apply across the industry, of course, safety, environmental responsibility, being good neighbors, and leading with science. So right now, at the same time that I'm getting the honor and the opportunity to speak to you, I have a handful of colleagues who are presenting with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection at a hearing on one of our key permits for our projects, and ensuring that all of our studies and science and everything is documented properly, and the DEP has a chance to take public comments as they conduct their review. Our project here, this is kind of laid out, and I think that this is helpful just to see that this is a 10, 11-year time frame for one project. I think future projects, I sure hope they don't take this many years. My son's about to enter college, and I was joking with him that he wants to go into engineering, and by the time he graduates, we'll just be starting construction for the most part, or at least on our second phase. And so he could start thinking about that now. But we spend at least 5 to 6 years doing surveys, engineering, all this kind of permitting work. As I said, there's a hearing tonight that's going on in the state. We'll have all of our federal permits by the fall, probably by the beginning of October. Once all of that is done, we start the financing process. Some of the early works manufacturing. HDD is a horizontal directional drill. Most projects do not dig a trench across the beach. You do an HDD, so you basically tunnel underneath. It's the same technology that's used to, if you've ever seen one of those trucks on the side of the highway that looks like it's just stacked full of pipes, that's actually a horizontal directional drill machine that runs those pipes underneath and then pulls them back out and brings the cable through. We will have some coastal transmission construction. There's some very funny kind of schedule, funny is not the right word, some very specific schedule constraints. We can't build offshore during certain seasons because of right whales. We can't build onshore during certain seasons because of basically, vacationers, and making sure that we're not doing road construction during peak seasons. Once you get to kind of the third step, so should be 2026, things sometimes change, but 26, 27, that's when we'll be doing the rest of our onshore construction. The offshore substation is the first thing to get built. You put in they put in the foundation, and then the substation and the export cable, and then you put in the rest of the foundations. And then, as it says here, you do the turbines, the cables that run in between. They're called the inter-array cables. And then once they all get connected to the offshore substation, you energize the turbines, you energize, excuse me, the projects, you can put in the turbines and they'll have power so you can commission them, and then we start operations. So I think these years are probably on the optimistic side. We might slip out a year, but this at least gives you a good sense of the phases. And as we go through this, I think it's really important, especially perhaps for yourself, but if you're talking to other folks, to understand the jobs that are part of offshore wind. So this is all in that first phase, this kind of engineering, design, planning. We've had thousands and thousands of hours of geophysical and geotechnical work with not a single injury off the coast of New Jersey, scanning the seafloor, drilling holes in specific locations, studying, basically, is it rocky sand or sandy rock? There is a big difference. And so thinking about our foundation design and how that all gets, kind of brought together. Then these are some of the surveys that we've had done. So like I said, that DEP permit, that DEP hearing that's going on tonight, we have over 40 different surveys that have taken place, everything from bats to the FAA to, whales and red knots, which are very small birds, to EMF, to visual impact, to historical resources, all these different things that are all part of this, that are looking at everything from the environmental suitability to things like this one in the middle, this mid-ocean analysis report and design. That's looking at making sure that our foundations are designed properly for wave heights and storms, and that our turbines can be designed to handle just about any weather that will be thrown at us here on the East Coast. And once all of that is done, once you have all the permits in place and you're ready to build, the first thing we start with is onshore construction. And so we have the manufacturing there, and then we start the offshore construction. And so the onshore work for these projects is more standard. It's onshore civil works, utilizing a lot of local unions and a lot of kind of standard equipment. Offshore is where it gets a little bit more complicated. In fact, a lot more complicated. But then once we get done with construction, we get to operations. For us, we will have an operations and maintenance facility in Atlantic City. Different projects will locate them in different places, usually close to projects. And then that picture in the bottom right-hand corner, that boat right there is called a CTV, or a crew transfer vessel. In essence, the Ford F-150 of the ocean. If you've ever had the chance to go to a wind project onshore, you have probably a 95% chance that it will be fully staffed by very good people. That's a 100% chance, but 95% chance that they're all going to be driving white Ford F-150s. That just seems to be the vehicle of choice at most wind farms that I've ever been to. But this boat for us will have multiples of these. It'll come in and out of Atlantic City, bringing crews to the projects. And you remember that picture I showed you earlier of the Virginia project with those transition pieces. You can see that there in the bottom right, that yellow. And so that boat actually pushes up against it, and the crew climbs out and enters the turbine from there. And for us, I just want to show the scope of like one project, knowing that we have lots of other projects. All these pictures in the top left, this is the new monopile factory that's in New Jersey, in Paulsboro, so just across the river from the airport. And I love telling people that this picture right here of this building, it's kind of a skeleton, is horribly outdated. We just need to get a better one. This is fully built. I've been inside of it, and they've actually manufactured the first monopile from there. This picture in the bottom left is the New Jersey wind port. This yellow portion right here next to the water, this is fully built. And right now, the state is in the process of doing some design work and preparing for the construction of the rest of these blue and yellow areas. This is a mock-up in the middle of our operations and maintenance facility with the CTVs that are all positioned out front. And this is actually the block in Atlantic City that we own, where our cables will come under the beach. There is a structure here, and I think we will probably be the only project in all of North America to need an easement from a beer garden to get to our area where the cable will make landfall. But that's where we will come on shore in Atlantic City. That is what I have for my slides, and so I hope there are questions. I'm going to I guess I'll keep the slides up. I'll just go back to the very beginning if there's folks who want to reference a slide, but otherwise I'm happy to go stop sharing and look at folks if you've got questions. But I turn it back over to you, Chuck, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Unmute. There, I unmuted. Okay. And there I am. Okay, so I'm looking for the chat. I see a couple of questions, not too many. Actually, I don't see any questions here in the chat.
Okay, did anyone want to ask some questions?
They're coming.
What strength of storm, hurricane, or most turbines able to withstand? What are the wave heights that are associated with those storms?
Don't know the exact wave heights, but the turbines are designed to handle up to a Category 5. The bottom of the blade, so I'm going to kind of answer some other questions around your wave height one. The bottom of the blade is usually at minimum 75 feet off the kind of the mean high water mark. And so, we're expecting ocean swells of anywhere from 20 to maybe 40 feet in a big storm, but we're designed to be well above that. And the other thing, just since I have the floor, I will just tell you the way the wind turbines work, and I'll try to do this through my camera as best I can, is the blades will feather, so they'll turn. So there's hydraulics that basically make the blade, so if the wind is slow, the blade is very flat, and if the wind is high, the blade is horizontal. If it's very low, it's more vertical. And it's the same principle as if you stick your hand out the window, or maybe your kids did, and you tell them to bring it back in, that you can kind of make that that feel, and the turbine wants to spin at the exact same RPM, rounds per minute or rotations per minute all the time. And so those blades are designed to fluctuate, to turn with the wind fluctuations. And in a big storm, what happens is they lock horizontal, so very flat, and they lock down and basically just let the wind blow over it. They don't want to actually spin when the wind is exceeding these very high, miles per hour that you would see in a large storm.
What's the biggest challenge you and others in offshore wind are experiencing at present?
I'd say there's a couple different ones. This is one of these like big questions that, I mean, the first is just the global supply chain issues. And then you can read about almost any industry struggling with this right now. And not that we can't get materials, but just that there's a lot of competition. I showed that this chart here of wind capacity by country. All these countries are competing for the same copper, the same aluminum, the same, those kind of things. I don't think we're going to run out of fiberglass anytime soon, but you do have these constraints that you have there. I think the other thing that we have going on is just the overall capacity for certain types of vessels. There's only 2 or 3 vessels that are strong enough, capable enough of installing the largest wind turbines. These things are weighing, in the hundreds of tons. And so it's not a vessel that there are very many of. And so again, we have that supply chain constraint. And I think one of the other things that is really important, and is actually part of the reason that I really enjoy the opportunity to speak with you all tonight, is we just have a lot of misinformation. And I think this happens in a lot of places right now, but we're just having a lot of basically just flat out lies and untruths told about our industry. And so we end up with, I'll go back to my mom test about when is my mom reaching out to me. When my mom is like, what is all this stuff about whales? And I'm like, oh my goodness, because that all happened last year. And it was one of those things where people were looking for a scapegoat. And so folks who don't like offshore wind decided to make offshore wind the scapegoat. And all the science, from folks who actually study whales, who study the ocean, was like, no, that's actually not the case. But it didn't matter for some folks. I have an uncle who is always saying that don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Well, that's fine if you're telling a story about like when you were goofing around as a kid. It's absolutely inappropriate when you're talking about, an endangered species or really anything that truly matters. And so that's what we're seeing is folks who just stopped caring about the truth and they just start spouting things out. And so that's a little bit more of an emotional side of things, but we have these kind of broader supply chain constraints combined with that. It just makes it more difficult, but not impossible. And that's what we're here to do, is to build these projects, and we're excited to do so.
So Joe, you want to get the next one?
Yeah, I'm going to jump since we're on this topic. Along those lines, many people think that wind generators will kill all of the birds. It's difficult to change their views. Is there any efforts underway to sway public opinion regarding these negative views?
There's a couple of things that I think are important to note, is that, like any situation, you've got some folks who are going to be the true believers on both ends. And then you got a whole lot of folks in the middle who are, I would imagine, Joe, most of the people you're talking about, who are kind of curious, like, wind turbines, birds, that might be a bad thing, but I don't know, maybe the birds avoid them. And that's actually, so right now, if you go to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management website, you can actually see every single project that has its federal permits, and with it, all of the studies that were done. And so if somebody wanted to, and they do, they can go and see all of the different avian studies we've done. And one of the things we've actually done, because the bird that would most likely be flying out there, or one of the birds, would be the red knot. Very small bird, a little bit bigger than a hummingbird, flies from, I think, Newfoundland to Tierra del Fuego. So quite a journey, does this twice a year, once down, once back up. And New Jersey is a very important restover spot. These things feast off of the eggs from horseshoe crabs. And so there's a tremendous concern that wind turbines could have a negative impact on the red knot. So we actually were the first developer. We tagged red knots, which is quite a lot of work. If you can imagine trying to catch something that's, like I said, a little bit bigger than a hummingbird, to catch it, make sure it's not hurt, and then to put a tag on it. And so these little tiny tags were put on them. And what we found is that the red knots, while they may fly out this distance from shore, they're flying at a couple thousand feet. They, in essence, take off like a rocket. And so as they leave the shore, the first thing they do is just go vertical. They have no, they're not like seagulls, which are kind of coasting, close to shore and things like that. And so all of the studies we've done have shown that there's not a lot of birds out here, and the birds that are well above the turbines. And so it's a good question, and it's one that if you actually want to see the data, it's all very public for both our projects and all the other ones that have gotten either partway through or all the way through their federal permitting process. And so again, this is one of those ones where folks, that's just sort of a knee-jerk reaction because some of the early wind projects in the U.S. Weren't in the right place when it came to birds, and there were fatalities. And so we learned from that. And so those projects don't exist anymore, or the turbines that are installed in areas where there might be more birds have special detection kind of equipment on them to shut down during migration periods. But for offshore wind, we feel that the data really points to there not being a negative impact based on just the overall the lack of density of birds in most of these areas, especially the further and further out you go.
Thank you. Chuck, I'll take another question. What are the current economics of offshore wind given high interest rates? And then there's a second question to that as well. We did not see Florida on the list of states with sizable wind plans.
So I'll do the Florida one first, just because the reason that Florida isn't on here is that the hurricane risk is that much higher, plus the wind speeds are that much lower. I'm just going to go back to, where's the best map? I'll just go to this one here. Basically, the further up the coast you go, the higher the wind speeds are. And so the wind speeds in kind of Virginia, North Carolina are slower than they are by the time you get to New York, New Jersey. These ones off of Massachusetts are even higher. And the Gulf of Maine has the highest wind speeds here on the East Coast. And so I would not say that Florida is off the table, but I would say that it is further out there. It's one of those places that, like places onshore that had lower wind speeds, as the turbine technology changed and could capture more of that wind, you start to see wind farms built in areas that they hadn't been before. I think Florida is the same thing. When it comes to the cost of offshore wind, there's been a lot of discussion about this in the press and the news. There's been projects that have had power contracts that have either had to walk away or had them canceled. And like all power generation, the cost has gone up. There's no kind of disputing that. But I think the one thing that is important to recognize with offshore wind is that all of these projects, especially in New York and New Jersey, they only get approved power contracts from the state if they meet a net benefits test, which is not a test that any other power generation is asked to meet. And what that means is that we have to show that if we're going to charge more for the electricity, if it costs more to generate offshore wind, that we need to be able to have a benefit that exceeds that, so that if it costs you as a ratepayer an extra couple dollars a month, that you as a ratepayer get a benefit, or at least the state as a whole gets a larger benefit. And so with that comes, as I was saying before, where's that map? All those jobs, those are part of the net benefit. And that, what we have is the environmental benefits that come from it, and all of the kind of the other associated work that we're doing around infrastructure and that kind of thing. And so, yes, it is a more expensive form of generation than some types of generation are out there, but it also is asked to show why it can do that. There's never been an assessment of other types of conventional generation to see if they could pass a net benefits test if they had to pay for their externalities. Offshore wind is generating electricity with no emissions, with no other use of resources once it's up and running. And so it's a bit of a balance, and we recognize that. And that's why in these solicitations with all the states that are here, they're always looking for the lowest price, but also the best benefits back to the ratepayer in the form of jobs and other kind of economic development, along with the environmental benefits.
Doug, you may want to comment on how important the wind speed is, since it's a cubic function of the power.
Sure. So basically, the wind speed, these turbines can operate from very low wind speeds, maybe 7, 8, kind of miles per hour, up into, I think for offshore, it's probably capped out in maybe the upper 30s or 40s. And that's where these blades are so big. Each one is about 300 feet long. We need to make sure that they're capturing as much of the wind as possible. And that again goes to why, the projects that are built in Massachusetts, they can, deal with some of the more expensive construction costs because it is deeper water there. But they can overcome that because they can generate a little bit more electricity. Whereas in New Jersey, we might have a little lower wind speeds than Massachusetts, but we have some of the more simple is the wrong word, more straightforward construction. And so it ends up being a bit of a balance, but it's the wind speed is an essential part of, go figure, right, of a wind project, and is one that undergoes the most analysis in the beginning and then pretty much continues through because when you get to the financing stage, the banks are going to want to look at what are your predictions for your generation over the course of the entire life of the project. And the turbines are expected to operate for about 30 years. And so that's a lot of predicting and a lot of analysis.
I'm sorry. You mentioned from start to finish the time frame for a project, but this is a question from the audience, Doug. So do you want to clarify if they're all going to be 15 years or?
Sure. So basically the projects from kind of an idea through the start of construction for the first projects, 10 years is really what we've been looking at. Our future projects will have shorter timelines, and you're seeing this from other developers as well. So that's just the development. So that's the permitting, getting your offtake agreement, locking in your supply chain contracts, and then actual construction. Then once you get done with that, you have what's expected to be a 30-year lifespan for the projects. Typically, state contracts are 20 to 25 years, and then the machinery should, if it's maintained properly, go for at least till 30 years. And then at that point, it does need to be removed as per the lease stipulations from the federal government. So it's quite a timeline. It's like I said, our first project, we secured that lease in the fall of 2018. And that puts us at roughly 10 years from when we secured the lease to when we'll be generating electricity for the first one. The other projects will come, a little faster after that.
So the lifetime is 40 years.
No, the lifetime of the turbines is about 30 years, but the overall from kind of an idea through the end can be up to 40 years.
That's what I meant. Sorry. Okay. Ben is asking, what's the connection between wind generation and wave generation, such as used in some military installations in the East Coast projects?
So we, as a leaseholder, are not allowed to do any wave generation inside of our lease. It was very clear when that was set up that we are just allowed to build the wind farm, build the wind turbines, and the inter-array cables that go connected between them, and nothing else. That you have to allow for the free flow of vessels, whether they be commercial, recreational, shipping, whatever it is, through the wind farm. There are some proposals for wave power and other things like that. Early on, there was ones that were proposed inside of wind farms, but that for the most part has been, I think, folks really aren't looking at that, mostly just because wind power, with very few exceptions, wave power with very few exceptions, just is much more expensive and even much more unproven. I don't know some of the military applications. I've read articles about these kind of smaller scale demonstrations with buoys that show a lot of promise with the up and down motion of the waves. But we as a company are not focused on it, and there's a lot of kind of research and some really cool stuff going on at different universities, but not anything at a commercial scale, at least here in the Northeast that I'm aware of.
Joe, you want to get the next one?
Sure. How does floating wind compare to fixed foundations? And is this the best option for California?
So it is the only option for California, and the output is expected to be on par. One of the things that is being considered for floating is if you would go to the same size turbines, or if it actually be, you have to balance, the bigger the turbine, the bigger the floating foundation, the bigger the fixed foundation. But you can imagine floating, if you had a turbine that was, say, 700 feet tall versus a turbine that was 1,000 feet tall, you had a very different set of kind of conditions to handle that balance. What is really amazing is that the turbines can produce power, with a lot of different wave action. The foundations are designed to minimize that. And so one of the things you do find off the coast of California and the other parts of the Northwest is the wave height definitely matters, but the wind speed is quite high. And so the reason that those markets haven't kind of jumped into offshore wind is just as quickly is because, again, it's much more complicated. We have a lot of experience in the US and globally with fixed bottom foundations. I mentioned Atlantic Shores is a 50-50 joint venture. So EDF Renewables, the side I come from, just deployed, the first offshore floating project that the company had ever done. And I think it is 3 turbines. And it took, a couple of years to build. So it's just a lot more complicated. So it's definitely kind of the next sort of over the horizon opportunity, but is not something that, I think you're going to see necessarily on the East Coast. You're probably not going to see floating before you see pretty full maturation of many of the leases that you see here on the screen that have fixed bottom and just much more, like I said, not simple, but more straightforward construction.
Are there oscillating wind turbines being utilized?
There are all sorts of different ones, and it's amazing, when you open up like a new web page on my computer, at least you can tell the articles that it's tracking that I've read, and there's a whole lot about different turbine technologies that are out there, and I've read a handful of them. Right now, all of the turbines that you're going to see deployed off the East Coast are going to look like this. They're going to be a 3-bladed wind turbine on a tubular tower. There's definitely some designs out there for self-erecting towers that would make construction simpler. Still a tubular steel tower. There have been in the past 2-bladed designs, but for the most part, the industry has settled on 3-bladed design as the most efficient, the one that the financing community is willing to get behind without kind of too much a tremendous amount of work, but without understanding the maturity of it. And so I don't see scenarios where you're going to find, and this is Doug Copeland's perspective, this is not the opinion of Atlantic Shores. I don't think you're going to see something different from an overall design anytime soon from this kind of standard design, which is a very different version of the onshore ones, but in many ways, quite similar as far as the general design.
Do offshore turbines need more maintenance than onshore turbines due to the environment they're in?
They need a different kind of maintenance. So yes, but it's also, it can be, working in the sea is quite dangerous. Like you can see, there's no easy exit from these turbines. And so that's where the operations and maintenance is so important. But we do, plan on having crews that are out, working on the turbines every single day. One of the things that you do is you treat it in the same way you would an onshore turbine, that there's going to be a warranty period. The turbine manufacturer is going to, be working on it for the first couple of years. It gets to the spot where the warranty is expired, and the owner of the project takes over the maintenance, at least the full responsibility for it. And that, you have to be a lot more specific about planning out the maintenance. So if you know that at year 10, you have to, so this box at the top, it's called the nacelle. If you know in year 10 that there is a component that's going to need to be replaced in all of the turbines, you have to find the right vessel and you have to line it up and plan for it so that you can get that work done. This isn't as simple as bringing in a crane or just driving it somewhere on a flatbed. And so I don't necessarily think they need necessarily that much more, but it definitely, as far as the turbine itself, but because it's in the marine environment, there's a lot more just to inspect as far as that foundation is taking a different kind of abuse than an onshore foundation, which is just a hole in the ground is dug, the foundation is poured, turbine is put on top. And I don't mean to simplify it, it's quite complicated, but once that foundation's in, nature isn't really trying to attack it. Whereas, these offshore transition pieces, they are coated in a very special paint. So that they don't rust, because rust is our enemy. The turbines themselves, I don't think I'm ever going to make it to the Oval Office, but I've heard that the White House has a negative pressure system, right? So that it's not actually, if there was ever something, inside, they could just pump the air right out of it. That's the same way for offshore wind turbines. So there's these huge fans that are sucking in air, taking all the salt out of it. And so inside the nacelle, it's actually sealed because you don't want salt water in there. So there are different types of maintenance that probably does add to some of it, but the actual machinery itself, as far as the turbine, isn't that much different from the onshore. There's just these other ancillary components of it. So probably a long answer to a short question to say a little bit more, but it's not like every day a tech is going to be at one of these turbines. They're definitely designed to run on their own.
So the ultimate consumer question for the vacationer on the Jersey Shore. Are the near shore wind turbines visible from the land?
So our projects, let me just go to the closer map. Our turbines are going to be about 10 miles from the coast. And we had a study that we did with Rutgers that said that 1 out of every 4 or 5 days over the course of the year would be the type of day where you could see the turbines. They will be visible from the shore. We have on our website photo simulations you can see. The thing is that most of those super clear days don't happen during the summer. So they're kind of before Memorial Day or after Labor Day. And so there's going to be certain times of year where they're going to be, the days where it's super hot. You're going to have this marine layer out there. And so that's where you have that kind of haze that usually starts at about 7 or 8 miles. And then you're going to have other parts of the day where it's going to be very clear. And so, like I said, the study we did with Rutgers, it was showing, I can't remember exactly what the number was, but like I said, it's about 1 out of every 4 or 5 days where you'd be able to have a clear view of them. So the further out you go, the less you're going to see them. But we're not trying to hide them. But we also recognize that it's not going to be something that is kind of omnipresent. And the other thing that I think is really important, especially in light of your speaker coming next month, is that at night they're not lit. They have a special aircraft detection lighting system, so ADLS, that sits on top. And so I think that over the course of the entire year, it's something in like the couple hours, I don't remember exactly what it is, that the lights would turn on. And they're on while a plane flies overhead, and as soon as the plane is gone, they turn off. And so unlike some early on wind farm projects that the lights are kind of always blinking, this detection lighting system has gotten, first of all, it's been approved by BOEM, which is essential and the FAA, because they're the ones who make the final call on what we use. But it's become much more commonplace. And so I think that's the other thing that's really important to mention for folks.
Is this industry too new to be using artificial intelligence for, in particular, the underwater construction and maintenance of these structures?
So no, and that's a great question. AI is used a lot in the prediction of kind of looking at future maintenance, looking at future output. And so I am well out of my depth in speaking about it, so I'm not going to go too much further, but it's absolutely something that we're using in it. And then with it comes actually some other testing of equipment. We're early on in looking at some monitoring equipment and how it can best be utilized to leverage some of the advances in artificial intelligence. But it's definitely it's a new industry, and a lot of the AI rollout is new, and so we'll probably do a lot of growing together.
So since I'm a professor, just to educate the audience, we're talking about something on the order of 20 gigawatts of electrical power by 2030. Is that an accurate statement?
We're not going to have that much built by 2030. Again, that's a Doug
2040?
Copeland comment, not Atlantic Shores one, but by 2035, yeah. I mean, so if we go to, let's see, right now you've got 2 projects. So Sunrise and Vineyard are under construction. Down here on the left, you've got the Vineyard project. Equinor, the neon green one that's up there, they just got all of their approvals, so they could potentially start construction next year. So we definitely had some headwinds as an industry over the last couple of years. And so, 2 years ago, 20 gigawatts by 2030 was probably quite feasible. But we're about to start really ramping up. And that's why when I showed, whoops, where are they? Those photos, sorry, there, like that's what's so exciting, is just that, these represent the first, kind of grouping of offshore wind projects at the utility scale that we get to see. But yeah, it is a very, it's going to go up. The question is kind of how fast, and the biggest, I think the key sort of limiting factor to some of this is going to be those installation vessels that are part of it.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Anybody want to unmute their microphone and ask a question directly? I don't see anybody asking a question directly. So I'm going to thank Doug again for his informative lecture and willingness to answer all the questions, and appreciate your opportunity to join and learn from Doug. And with that, I guess we'll say goodnight. Maybe I'll turn it back to Phil for final word.
We'll look forward to seeing everyone on June 25th, the last Tuesday of June, to hear about dark skies. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight.